To me, there's nothing more liberating than to be able to play a chord and to know where that pentatonic scale is right underneath your fingers. No matter what cage shape you're in, whether that's the E-shaped C or the D-shaped C. We're going to figure all this out, and I got a really good tip that I want to share with you that'll make things a lot easier. Hello, my name is Keith. Welcome back to the channel. So what I just showed you there was the pentatonic scale and all the different cage shapes in the key of C. So how do I know that, and how does it look so easy to a lot of people that you just name a shape or a chord and they could just play the pentatonic scale just like that? I got an easy trick to figure that out. So stick with me. I'll make this lesson a little bit quicker than the other ones, and I'll add some bonus content towards the end for different shapes and different pentatonics and the way I think when I'm approaching the fretboard. So to preface this whole thing, when you're learning guitar and you're trying to learn all these different chords, chord shapes, scales, whether it's the major scale, minor scale, pentatonics, Mixolydian, all these different modes, you're just thrown a ton of information from all places. You got charts and diagrams, you have notation, you have tabs, you have the scale charts with all the dots on them. You know what I'm talking about. We're going to be using one of those here, but don't get scared. What I want to show you today is how to kind of separate your mind from that stuff a little bit. That stuff is important, but to separate it so you could just focus on the fretboard and know exactly what you want to play when the time comes. So how are we going to do that? Let's just focus on the bottom two strings here, the E and the A string. Those are our anchors for most of the chords that we go on. If we find the root on these two strings, then we could play just about any chord and any permutation of that chord if we find the correct shape to go with it. Now, I've said this before and I'm going to stick with it. If there's one scale to know at all, it's the major scale. A lot of people skip over that. A lot of people learn the minor pentatonic scale, the A minor pentatonic scale, because it's the easiest thing to memorize and it sounds really good. It's very popular, but eventually you're going to have to break out of that. So I highly recommend learn the major scale. I have a video I'll link up here on how to play it, but for the purpose of this, I'll run through it real quick, and then we're going to jump into the pentatonic scales and how to kind of find them on the fretboard. So sticking with the C chord, let's jump down to the fretboard here. We know that we have a C here. We have a C here, here, here. All right, so with this E-shaped C, how do I know that's an E-shaped C? That's pretty easy. We have an A here, right? Because this is our A chord, or A note right here on the 5th fret of the E string. And then that E shape is an A. A. B is on the 7th fret. C is on the 8th fret. All right, so what is the major scale? Let's run through the major scale once real quick. That is the 8th fret. 8th fret of the low E string, 10th fret, and then up to the A string, the 7th fret, then the 8th fret of the A string, 10th fret of the A string, 7th fret of the D, 9th fret of the D, and then you're back to up an octave to the C on the 10th fret of the D. All right, here's the trick, and then we'll jump to the pentatonic part of it next. So here's the trick. We're anchored right here on the root note, which is on our low E string. We know that's a C. So we start that pattern that I'm going to show right here on the screen, right here. All right, so what if we wanted to play the C here, and we wanted to play the C major pentatonic scale there? How do I know that? Easy. We're going to take that chart and all those dots, and we're just going to imagine that E string isn't there. Let's just imagine that E is replaced with an A. So we're looking at it as if it's the A string instead of the E string, and we start the pattern exactly the same way, but on the A string. Here's what I mean. So here's how we imagine what I just said there. If we're starting that pattern on the E shape, we know that the root note is on the low E string. That's where we start that pattern. Alright, but if we're playing the C here, our root note, instead of being on the E string, is on the A string on the 3rd fret. So that's right here. So we'll play that same exact pattern that we played up here, but we're going to be playing it right here. Simple as that. We just moved it up by 1 string. Same pattern, you just move it up 1 string. Now you can continue. Let's say we wanted to continue with this whole thing all the way through that 2nd octave. Let's just play that whole scale through. Okay, so what if we wanted to translate that down here? It's going to get a little different because since we're starting on the A string, we have to deal with the B string and the E string that are tuned a little bit differently due to the nature of the guitar. What is that nature? You know how when we're tuning our guitars, we do everything from the 5th fret? But when we get to the G string to tune the B, we have to go back to the 4th fret. Otherwise, it'll sound like this. So things get a little bit weird, but that's when this whole learning that major scale from the 1st octave comes into play, because once we have that ingrained in our head, we're going to know we hit wrong notes when we go to move on to that 2nd octave. Here's an example. I'm going to purposely play this C major scale starting from the A string and go all the way down through the 2nd octave and mess up when I get to that 2nd octave. That does not sound right because we already established those 7 notes when we played that 1st octave down, and when we go through that 2nd octave, you want to match those notes just in a higher pitch. So that sounds a lot better. All right, so there is that rule. When it comes to those 2 shapes on these 2 strings, the E string and the A string, you could apply that across the board, whether it's an A or we're doing a D. Here's a D major. It applies across. It's just so fun. Once you figure out how all these things work, you'll be off to the races. Now that we have that established with the major scale, let's look at the C pentatonic scale or the major pentatonic scale, because it's the same exact thing. You're just minusing a couple notes here. You're missing a couple notes. So that is our C major pentatonic scale. If you know that, if you don't know that, the dots are right up here for the pentatonic. We're just going to get rid of a couple of those, and all right, so that's our pentatonic scale. And then if we're doing it up here, we're doing that same exact pattern for the pentatonic scale, but moving it up a string. Works both ways. All right, so that is my little trick that I wanted to show you there. Hope you take that and run with it and move up across both octaves of this whole thing and kind of use your ear from that 1st octave to kind of suss out what's going on when you get up to the higher strings in the 2nd octave. So here's the bonus content. Here is how I personally memorize all these pentatonic scales in each of these shapes. We'll start from here and we'll end up here, starting with the C. All right, how do I know the pentatonic scale for the C? I think of My Girl, right? You learn My Girl, that intro, then that is the C major pentatonic scale. Easy enough. The A shape of the C. We just learned that one, so I'll skip it. The G shape of the C. How do I know that one? Here's how I memorize that one. Everybody knows the A minor pentatonic scale? It's the same exact thing as the C major scale, but instead of starting right here on that A, that's not our root. Our root is up here on the C. We're going to play all the notes from that A minor pentatonic scale, but we're leaving out this A string, or the low E string, the A note, and we're starting from the, what is this, the 8th fret. Doesn't that sound happy? But if I started from here, it sounds a little more bluesy. Man, you could just say that this is a C. This is a C major. Or this is an A. All right, so that's how I memorize the G shape in pentatonic. All right, so we're moving up to the E. We just discussed that one, so I'll skip that. So we're going up to the D shape. That's our little D triad there. This one is a little tricky. So the way I kind of think about this one, I just memorized it. There's no going around it. I just had to memorize that. The moral of the story is there's some things that you just have to memorize because it's just easier just to get it, lock it in your head, and leave it there forever than to kind of ignore it and try to figure it out. So the couple things that you do need to definitely memorize is that major scale, because the major scale is the basis of where everything comes from, in my opinion. Because if you take that major scale, you could take any chord and adjust the numbers of that scale and flatten the third, for example, then you have a minor chord. And there's so many triads within there. You got the 1, 3, and 5. You find that in your major scale. 1, 2, 3, right? So we take this 3 and we flatten it. That's a minor, right? Instead of that's happy, this is sad. So that's kind of one of those things that you have to memorize. So that's the lesson for today. I really, really hope this helps. If you thought it was helpful, please think about subscribing, because that's all I want. I just want to help, because all this stuff, especially this, I wish I would have learned in the 90s when I was learning guitar. Instead, I had to learn by watching a VHS tape, a 25-minute VHS tape, over and over and over. And I learned that 25 minutes of that VHS tape so good. I'm a master at that VHS tape. It was a Starlix tape with Michael Thompson. I love that. I actually rebought it and watched it recently. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool. So in any case, I hope you have a good night, and I will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye. Landed where the other pick landed.